How does your head fit in that hat? So, as you may be able to tell, I've got a reasonably big head. Okay, hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to do just basically a question and answer. So I put out a thing on Instagram last week. So thanks to everyone who sent in a question. I'm just going to try and rattle through maybe like 10 to 15 questions, give some answers. Anything I did miss off, I'm very sorry. Anything you still want to hear more about, please just put a comment in the section below. The plan was to try and film this video while riding my bike. So that was last Wednesday, and Wednesday turned out to be an absolute shocking day. Pissed it down from the minute me and Will Monday got out on the bikes till when we got back in. So a few days on, here we are about to start the question and answer. Okay, so the first question is, how many hours do I train a week? And this actually really depends on the time of year, if it's off season or if I'm building up to a race. I'm currently still trying to build up to Outlaw X, so at the moment I'd say probably somewhere in the range of sort of 18, trying to push up on 22 if you include sort of your S&C kind of work as well. And then when I go to off season, it's much more sort of training for health and fitness more than actually training to compete. So that sort of drops down to about anywhere between sort of 8 to 10 hours probably of just sort of like really easy light sort of training. The second question I've got today is it's based off a picture I put up. Why was my hat blue in the picture? So why my hat was blue, it was actually a Ironman branded hat. I got it, it's a running hat, and I got it when I did Weymouth 70.3 in 2018. So that was my first Ironman branded event, and it was a sort of a souvenir because I wasn't really sure how many I would be doing, so I thought I'd pick up a little hat, and it sort of turned into a bit of a collection. So every Ironman branded event I do now, I tend to pick up a hat. Okay, so the next question I've got is, what is the biggest obstacle when training? The biggest obstacle is actually pretty hard. There's sort of like many probably little ones, and a lot of you guys will probably have these. It's about sort of trying to fit in your training sessions around your sort of day-to-day life. So I currently swim coach, as well as I've got a partner called Emily. So it's sort of balancing the sort of home life with the work life, and also trying to get the training in. So that's a pretty tough, I would say obstacle, but it's pretty tough sort of balancing those sort of three things. I'd say probably the biggest obstacles sometimes you have is, especially in Wales for cycling, is the weather. So during the winter it's quite difficult to get out sometimes, because when it is somewhere between sort of 0 to 10 degrees outside and raining, it's kind of a balancing act of whether you get the session in or do you miss the session. And obviously there's pros and cons to both sides of that. Sort of some of the pros would be you're sort of ticking off a session, or you got a green in your training peaks, but then obviously the side effects of going out in the cold and getting wet, you're sort of more susceptible to illness and things like that. So it's sometimes a balancing act, and I'd say that's probably another obstacle you could face in terms of your training. So the next question I have is a question basically asking, what is the hardest part about being a triathlete? As with everything, the hardest part is the fact you've got 3 sports to train for. That being the hardest part is actually almost the reason I love triathlon so much. Coming from a swimming background and being very used to just sort of going through the process of swimming every day. Now I sort of have 3 sports to choose from. The question actually moves on from that really nicely. So the question is, what made me swap trunks for swim, bike, run? So yeah, as I've said before, I'm an ex-swimmer, so I kind of made that transition and it wasn't sort of an instant transition, it was kind of a transition that happened over a couple of years. The main reason I probably swapped was the fact that I kind of had hit a point in swimming where I'd done it for 16 odd years. It became a bit repetitive, and I think I got to the point where I wasn't progressing at the rate I'd like to be progressing, and therefore I was getting to a point where I was probably falling out of love with the sport a little bit, and I didn't want to resent a sport that I'd been so heavily involved in for years. So actually being able to progress into a sport where I could still combine that passion I've always had for swimming has been brilliant. So I think that's probably the main sort of reason I transitioned and swapped from swimming over to triathlon. The next question: how does Ironman training compare to swim only training in terms of volume and intensity? That's a really good question. I actually probably, as a swimmer, I would probably say I overtrain sometimes a little bit. So at certain points in my career, I was swimming up to sort of 22 hours in the pool, with additional time in the gym. I was probably spending maybe 3.5-hour sessions in the gym, in addition to the bits and pieces of pre and post pool. So once you sort of factor in all of those bits and pieces, you're probably looking at, in terms of duration, 30 plus hours even, and that is probably quite physically draining. And those that come from a swimming background will know that actually the intensity in swimming is a very high intensity sport. If you think about all the events, sort of your 50 meters, 100 meters, 200, 400s, they're all sort of 5 minutes or less, and even your sort of distance events in the pool, they sort of are only sort of 16 minutes. So yeah, definitely the volume was a lot higher, and the intensity too. So what's actually been quite good is I now train obviously a little bit less. I also, probably the intensity overall is less, but actually when I have the opportunity to do a hard sort of session on the bike, or some running intervals, or I do still do a swim that's pretty relatively hard here and there, but when you have the opportunity to do those hard sessions, I probably am able to push harder because I'm fresher, and the rest of the training sort of is helping those sessions, not hindering. When you're doing big volume in the pool of 70-80 kilometers a week with a lot of intensity in that as well, the quality of the work I think drops. And I'm probably more of a quality athlete now, in terms of I take the easy stuff really easy, and I'm able to push really hard when I need to, and sort of really get those physiological gains. So yeah, it's a very different. Those hours of training that I did as a teenager and in my young 20s, that's definitely not gone, and it's definitely in the bank. And I think that's always going to be there, because you're always constantly sort of developing that cardiovascular system. So the next question is, there's actually a couple on Kona. So as a lot of you are aware, 2020 Kona was meant to be next month. Got postponed to February 2021. And then a couple of weeks ago, we then got the news that it's going to be postponed to October next year. So I've now got 13 months to wait. With that being said, I did kind of have a plan moving up. So the first question was, what Kona specific prep have I got planned, or is it the same as just Ironman prep? And actually it is very, very similar to Ironman prep. I'm still going to go through the process of building a big cardiovascular base. I'm going to increase my intensity in all three disciplines, and then I'll look at some sort of race specific sessions in the sort of the last 8 week building into the race. The only sort of the difference is that, and the fact that I've really got to consider with Kona, is that it's going to be such a hot race. So things like hydration, heat adaptation and stuff like that are things that I've started to look at and address. So I will definitely be getting in a heat chamber in Swansea University, hopefully. And that was meant to happen this year. COVID has obviously put a halt on their heat chamber being put in, but I'm still hopeful that's still going to be coming in soon, so therefore I can use that in the build up to Kona next year. And I think other things that I might look to try and do is a training camp somewhere like Lanzarote, to sort of get the feel for crosswinds on the TT bike. But I say the overall prep is just going to be very, very similar just to Ironman prep. You can only do so much in terms of sessions, etc. Sometimes it's just very basic. You've just got to get swim, bike, run volume in your body, and if you do that, you're going to be in a good physical position to race. And then like the little things like nutrition strategies and heat adaptation and that sort of stuff, they're sort of the icing on the cake when you look at it. The second question I had about Kona was, once I qualified for Kona, did I feel more pressure from people expecting the results? And I'd say probably possibly, but it's actually, obviously I haven't had an opportunity to race since Wales properly. But actually the pressure probably comes from myself. So that was the first opportunity I had to do an Ironman event. And it kind of just, once you go through an event like that, you instantly, as soon as you cross the line, you're reflecting on what you did in the race itself, but also in the preparation leading into it. And instantly I kind of knew that there's a lot of things that could have gone better, which is exciting. So actually the pressure I put on myself is probably more than the pressure I feel from anyone around me, because I know I kind of can see where I want to get to in terms of performance. And obviously the only person that I'm going to really feel the pressure when it comes to race day is myself, because everyone around me just wants the best for me. So and that's sort of the thing about having sort of a really good having a really good support network around you. So people who advise me, family, friends, like if I didn't want to do triathlon and I had a bad race, they're still going to be there by my side. So I think that's key. I've got another question that was basically based around my FTP, so he must have listened to the Road to 10B podcast. So if you haven't listened to that podcast yet, go over to Apple or Spotify and check that out. But the question is, my starting at FTP was great, but what Vo2 Max sessions, etc. did I do to try and transfer that over to Ironman? So a lot of the intervals I did were kind of like 2 to 5 minute efforts. And actually those sort of Vo2 Max sessions were actually they relate to Ironman Wales quite heavily, because Ironman Wales is such a power on, power off kind of race where you are climbing a hill for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then you kind of have the relief of the downhill off the back of that. So actually, by not intentionally, but by doing Vo2 Max sessions on a trainer, you're kind of replicating that sort of power on, power off sort of tactic. What I probably did later on, so as I sort of progressed through those sessions, is I probably lessened the rest. So I'd do an effort and then have maybe less recovery before then doing another effort. Or I would do an effort and then my recovery would be at a more sort of tempo in terms of I wouldn't just completely drop off and just recover. I would sort of sit at something that's moderately hard and then try and jump up again, and that kind of teaches the body to flush the lactate a little bit when you're going really intense, but you're still sort of building that endurance at the same time. So yeah, very much, especially for Ironman Wales, very much on and off. As I go to races that are a bit more flat in the future, it's going to be much more sort of sustained power, so you're going to be looking at doing longer intervals, at trying to hold more consistent power. Okay, so what motivates me to get up early and smash the training? Well, I don't smash it every day, that's the first thing to say. But what motivates me is I just love exercising. So be it swim, bike or run, I'm very self-motivated to go out and get the sessions done. And actually I hold myself quite accountable. So you keep focused during Ironman. That's a hard one. I think I'd be lying if I say I didn't daydream a little bit, especially on the bike. But I think it's kind of, there's enough going on in the race to keep you occupied. How many calories do you consume during an Ironman? That's a good question. I'd probably say that I was probably a little bit sloppy with my race nutrition for Wales, but I'd say that ideally it's sort of like 80 to 100 calories, carbs an hour, sorry. And I probably was somewhere in the region of 60 to 70 carbs an hour, so probably under fueling, which is why I dropped off later in the race. Yes, shaved legs do make a difference. They make you feel faster. They have aerodynamic benefits, and they look good. So I also got a question which was, who was my biggest inspiration for doing an Ironman event? And I know he wants me to say him, so I'm going to say him to start. So a guy I used to work with called Dave, we used to coach at City of Cardiff Swimming Club together, and we went out to Lanzarote, Club La Santa, a few years back, and we saw a leaflet for the Lanzarote Ironman. And I, with the other team managers and that, we sort of really just egged him on to try and enter. So we put out a post on Twitter and we said if it got 500 retweets, then he would enter for the following year. Unfortunately, only got about 287, but it must have done something, because I think it sowed the seed for me then to enter. The other factor that probably led me to doing an Ironman was in 2017, my dad competed in the Outlaw Full. That's the first time I've kind of ever seen a long distance triathlon, or actually any triathlon. So watching that and kind of experiencing what a long day, and me actually thinking it was a bit stupid for competing in that event, definitely sowed a seed, and then obviously led to me to eventually entering one myself. What is your biggest regret in training so far? My biggest regret in training so far is probably just not listening to my body when I should do. Being so new to the sport, and not having a running background just means that I am injury prone, and I think I need to go through that sort of breaking in process. So yeah, biggest regret in training so far is definitely just not listening to my body, not allowing the warning signs to kind of tell me when I should back off and actually take a few days off running, instead of pushing through and picking up injuries, which I have done. So that's something that I'm trying to address moving forward. So whenever I do get warning signs of an injury coming, and especially in running, I'm being super cautious, and I want to try and keep them at bay. Okay, next question is, what nutrition did I have on the bike at Ironman Wales? And I kept it pretty simple. I had a mixture of Beta Fuel and pH tablets in my bottles. So Beta Fuel is made by SAS, and that had I think it's about 82 grams of carbohydrate in it, with a sort of 1500 pH tablet to make sure I'm on top of my electrolytes as well. So I had bottles of that. I also had a aero bottle, which I put, I think it was 7 or 8 high five gels in that, because they're quite watered down, so the stomach sort of deals with them quite nicely. And then I had 2 Cliff bars in my nutrition pouch, in my bento box, which was broken up into little cubes, sort of like mouth-sized bites, where in the first couple of hours I took a bite on every sort of 20 minutes or so, just to have solid food in my stomach at the beginning of the bike. And then after about sort of 2.5 hours on the bike, it was just solid liquid in the form of Beta Fuel and gels. Okay, so I've had a few questions about the same sort of thing. So one of the questions was, what would I eat in a day? And the second question I've also had is, how would do I structure my diet around my training? And I've also had, what sort of nutritional advice would I give to people who are training? So answering all three of those questions in one, really. In in a typical day, I tend to, depending on the day, but if I'm doing a run first thing in the morning, I will have a coffee and then do the run straight away. I find that anything sort of 70 minutes or less, I'm quite comfortable going out and just doing it completely fasted and getting that session done. Also can't eat before running because I find that sort of sits too much in my stomach, and that's a horrible feeling. I then tend to have quite a big breakfast, so I'd have a bowl of porridge or some sort of cereal. That's sort of my go-to kind of breakfast. Mid-morning, snack on cereal bars, fruits. Then for lunch, I quite like to have something substantial. My go-to for lunch is normally like eggs, so my sort of eggs on toast in terms of poached eggs if possible. Try and get some avocado involved. If I haven't got bread, try and get some bagels, but it's normally quite a sort of a high calorie dense food. I'm very much a big carbohydrate eater, so something big for lunch, and then I sort of snack again through the afternoon depending on when my session's full. And then dinner is, I always cook with my partner Emily, so again we try and include as much veg in as we can, but we also are very, very weak when it comes to pizza, so that's another go-to for me. I'm also a big chocolate eater, so I probably would say that I don't go more than a day without having a bit of chocolate. So really I'd say like balanced is my diet. There's definitely parts of my diet that I can improve, and in terms of structuring my diet around my training, I don't tend to do days where I'd have less and days where I have more. My diet seems pretty consistent, and I sort of eat as much as my body kind of craves, and I find that works really well for me. I don't put on weight or lose too much weight. I stay nice and stable. Got some I'd say less serious questions to finish. So the first one is it true if I drink a Red Bull it will give me wings? All I can say is it gives you good legs. I'm not sure about wings. Can of Red Bull, nice little caffeine hit. It's good for turbo sessions, definitely. Next question is from Triathlon Dan. So thanks for the question, Dan. So he's asked me, is dropping Will Monday fun? 100%, very enjoyable. Although I try and avoid going for runs with Will because he'd absolutely slaughter me. So yeah, good fun though. How does Emily feel about the added furniture in the upstairs bedroom? A little bit of a pain cave. I'm going to say she's not the most pleased with that, but yeah. Next question about the hat in the picture that I put on Instagram again of me running. I'll try and put it on screen again. How does your head fit in that hat? So, as you may be able to tell, I've got a reasonably big head. The answer to that question is simple. It's Velcro, and I loosened it. So, who would win in an arm wrestle, me or Liam Lloyd? Liam Lloyd's one of the guys I train with quite a lot. I'm going to have to go with myself, just purely because I've got the swim background from the two of us, so I think I've probably got slightly larger arms than Liam. But it'd be interesting to see. Maybe we'll get that on video next time. Okay, so the final question I've got, and I just want to finish off by saying, thank you so much to everyone who sent me a question today. I've really enjoyed answering them. So the final question I have is, what advice would you give to anyone wanting to get into triathlon? And it's simple. It's just either start swim, bike or running. If you've got a background in one of them, then you're so much further ahead than you think. But just start exercising, watch YouTube, because there are a lot of good content out there. I binge watched things like Triathlon Terran when I was sort of trying to basically learn what triathlon was a couple of years back. So yeah, just try and get some good contact. Look for local clubs and communities. So I joined a club called Cycle Specific, and the knowledge I got from that was huge. But in your local area, there'll always be little community clubs that are gonna give you so much help. So go and join one of them. And don't feel, I say like everyone starts somewhere, so don't feel like you don't know enough about it to start it. So first triathlon I did, I borrowed my uncle's road bike. You don't have to have your own bike to be able to do a triathlon. So just give it a go, get involved, and hopefully enjoy it. It's been really fun answering some of your questions today. I hope it hasn't been too boring. If there's anything that obvious that I missed off, then please pop a question in the section below. I will try and answer it. I want to try and do more of these sort of Q&As. So even if it's just sort of more about sort of training tips, I'm quite transparent in what I do. So if you ever want to see what I'm doing, most of my workouts are on Strava, or especially my bike and run. And then, yeah, follow me on Instagram, check out the content I'm doing. I have got Outlaw X, which is coming up in 5 weeks' time now, which will be, yeah, really nice to finally get a race in 2020. So, yeah, keep following the journey. As always, if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like. Please pop a comment in the section below. Subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying what you see. And then, yeah, next week I'll bring out a video of me and Liam Lloyd doing an arm wrestle. Yeah, cheers for now, guys.